Welcome to the world of Queen Victoria, Empress of an era. Tonight, we'll settle in and uncover the remarkable life of a woman who shaped a century. Now, find your favorite spot, get cozy. Let your shoulders relax, maybe sink a little deeper into that chair. It's time to unwind and let the day's worries drift away, just like clouds in a lazy afternoon sky. Where are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it? Evening or morning in your perfectly chaotic schedule? Wherever you are, I hope you've got something warm to sip on. If you're enjoying these journeys back in time, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss another captivating story. It's a simple way to keep our explorations coming. And as we prepare to step back, imagine a little girl, barely a woman herself, living in the grand Kensington Palace, completely unaware of the immense empire she would soon inherit. Her story, from a sheltered childhood to the heart of a changing world, begins now. The years leading to Victoria's ascension in 1837 saw a kingdom wrestling with its own identity, a process driven by a series of significant governmental shifts. Just a few years prior, the Great Reform Act of 1832 had begun to redraw the boundaries of political representation, a monumental effort to address the imbalances inherited from earlier centuries. This legislation, the culmination of years of public pressure and often heated parliamentary debate, sought to grant more voting rights to the burgeoning industrial towns and cities, thereby chipping away at the entrenched power of older, less populated districts. The materials of this reform were largely bureaucratic. Lengthy reports detailing constituency boundaries, petitions presented to Parliament, and the slow dissemination of new laws through printed pamphlets and official gazettes. The labor organization involved a complex interplay between members of Parliament who drafted the bills, government clerks who processed the paperwork, and the wider public whose voices were beginning to be heard through newspapers and public meetings. One of the chief challenges of this period was the sheer inertia of the established system, which often resisted any change that threatened its privileges. Ministers like Lord Grey and Lord John Russell, though instrumental in pushing reforms through, faced considerable opposition, leading to what contemporary accounts describe as bitter exchanges in the House of Commons. The technical processes of governance itself were slow. Legislative proposals required careful drafting, multiple readings, and royal assent, a drawn-out procedure that meant even minor adjustments could take months, if not years, to implement. This foundational work in reforming Parliament, however, created a more responsive governmental structure, setting the stage for future national development and demonstrating how gradual adjustments to societal rules can profoundly alter a nation's future course. The landscape of governance, therefore, was not static as Victoria took the throne. It was a system in flux, shaped by the ongoing efforts to modernize its very framework. These reforms, though often contentious, began to lay the groundwork for a more representative government, a stark contrast to the more aristocratic systems of the past. The materials of governance, such as paper for official documents and ink for writing, were handled by diligent clerks who ensured the smooth operation of this evolving bureaucracy. The labor organization extended beyond elected officials to include the many individuals responsible for record-keeping and communication, a testament to the complex machinery of the state. Indeed, the very concept of who participated in governing was shifting, a significant change from the days when only a select few held sway. The challenges of bridging the gap between the traditional power structures and the demands of a changing society required constant negotiation and adaptation. The technical processes involved in updating electoral rolls and managing parliamentary procedures were painstaking, reflecting the meticulous nature of building a more inclusive political system. This era's legislative efforts, born from intense public scrutiny and political will, fundamentally altered the nature of representation, a transformation that echoes in today's ongoing dialogues about how societies structure their governing bodies. It is a curious detail that some of the most fervent debates around these reforms centered on the precise wording of clauses related to property qualifications for voters, revealing how deeply economic status was intertwined with political voice. Such discussions, documented in the parliamentary records of the time, highlight the intricate and often painstaking nature of legislative change. The materials used to record these debates, quill pens, ink, and paper, were the tools of a deliberative process that would, over time, redefine the relationship between the governed and their government. The systematic examination of these historical processes offers a valuable lens through which to understand the mechanisms of societal adaptation. The transition to a more representative government was not an overnight event, but a series of measured steps, each building upon the last. The labor organization within the government departments grew in complexity, with specialists emerging to manage different facets of administration. The materials they worked with were increasingly printed documents, reflecting a move towards more standardized communication. The challenges inherent in such widespread change meant that opposition remained a constant factor, requiring persistent effort from reformers to achieve their aims. The meticulous technical processes of drafting, debating, and enacting laws ensured that changes were, at least in theory, carefully considered. This period saw a noticeable increase in the publication of political pamphlets and newspapers, crucial materials for disseminating information and shaping public opinion. The labor organization of journalists and printers became vital in this burgeoning public sphere. The challenges for these early publications included censorship and the difficulty of reaching a widespread audience. Nevertheless, these efforts to inform the populace were essential to the process of reform, demonstrating how widespread access to information can empower citizens and drive societal change. It is remarkable how early forms of mass communication played such a critical role in shaping the political landscape of the time. The very idea of parliamentary representation was being redefined, moving beyond a system that favored landed aristocracy towards one that acknowledged the growing influence of merchants and industrialists. The materials that symbolized this shift included not just parliamentary documents, but also the tangible products of the expanding economy, from textiles to manufactured goods. The labor organization involved not only those in government, but also the growing number of professionals, lawyers, engineers, and financiers who contributed to the nation's wealth and whose voices were increasingly being heard in political discussions. This evolving social and economic structure presented a significant challenge to the old ways of governing, necessitating continuous adaptation. A lingering scholarly debate from this era concerns the true extent to which the Great Reform Act truly enfranchised the working classes. While it expanded suffrage, significant barriers remained for many. The technical processes of registering voters and conducting elections were also subject to various local customs and regulations, creating a patchwork of practices across the country. The labor organization of election officials, however, was dedicated to administering these processes, often with limited resources. The materials used in these elections, from ballot papers to polling booths, were the physical embodiments of this complex democratic experiment. This period of reform, therefore, was not a singular event, but a foundational stage in a much longer process of democratic evolution. These governmental reforms demonstrate recurring patterns in human civilization. The hum of the newly installed steam engine was a constant companion, a rhythmic pulse that underscored the transformation of the workshop. This powerful machine, a marvel of iron and ingenuity, was revolutionizing the way goods were made, a far cry from the gentle, manual efforts of earlier times. The very materials used in its construction were testament to this shift. Precisely cast iron parts, forged steel connecting rods, and brass fittings, all brought together with remarkable accuracy. The process of assembling such an engine was a significant undertaking, demanding a specific type of labor organization that brought together skilled engineers, mechanics, and common laborers, each with a distinct role in its operation and maintenance. The engineers who designed these early steam engines, men like James Watt himself, meticulously worked through complex mechanical principles. Their technical processes involved detailed calculations for cylinder bore and stroke, steam pressure, and the precise gearing required to convert the engine's power into rotary motion. They understood that the efficiency of the engine, measured by how much work it could do for a given amount of coal, depended on these intricate details. The materials science of the time was still developing, meaning that finding iron strong enough to withstand the pressures without warping or breaking was a considerable challenge. And the quality of the coal used as fuel also directly impacted performance and longevity. The transition to steam power was not without its difficulties, for the very novelty of the technology presented a steep learning curve for everyone involved. One significant challenge was simply getting these massive machines to operate reliably. Early engines were prone to breakdowns, requiring constant adjustment and repair by the mechanics who maintained them. Furthermore, the intense heat generated by the steam and the moving parts meant that the working environment could be quite uncomfortable, with sweat often beading on foreheads as workers toiled to keep the machines running smoothly. This created a new set of physical demands for those employed in the burgeoning factories. The organization of labor within these early industrial settings was itself a profound change. Instead of individual artisans working in small workshops, large numbers of people were brought together under one roof to operate and tend to the steam-powered machinery. This factory system required a different approach to management, with a clear hierarchy of foremen and supervisors overseeing the workforce. The skills required were also changing, with a greater emphasis placed on the ability to operate and maintain machinery, rather than the traditional craft skills of handloom weaving or smithing. This shift meant that workers often performed more repetitive tasks, becoming specialized cogs in a larger mechanical system. The materials needed for this industrial expansion were vast, requiring significant extraction and transport. Coal, the primary fuel source for steam engines, had to be mined in increasing quantities, and the iron ore needed for the engines themselves and the machinery they powered also demanded extensive operations. This created a ripple effect, stimulating other industries such as mining and metallurgy, and requiring new logistical processes to move these raw materials to the factories and foundries. The sheer volume of materials processed meant that the physical landscape began to change, with mines, canals, and later railways becoming increasingly prominent features of the British countryside. The technical processes extended beyond the engine itself, encompassing the entire factory operation. Consider the spinning mills, where steam engines powered rows of spinning machines, transforming raw cotton into thread at unprecedented speeds. Each machine was a complex arrangement of gears, spindles, and rollers, all synchronized by the central engine's power. The maintenance of this synchronized operation was critical. A single broken thread or a malfunctioning spindle could halt a section of the mill, disrupting the carefully orchestrated production flow. This reliance on complex, interconnected machinery highlighted the new level of technical expertise required to keep industry moving. The relentless operation of the steam engine also presented new challenges for the people who worked alongside it. The constant noise, a low thrumming accompanied by the hiss of steam and the clatter of machinery, could be fatiguing over long hours. While the machines greatly amplified human effort, they also imposed a new rhythm on work, dictating the pace and intensity of labor. The sheer power of the engines, while a source of wonder, also demanded a profound respect for their potential dangers, as moving parts and high-pressure steam were not to be trifled with. This created a dynamic of both awe and caution among the workforce. The societal implications of this shift to steam power were immense, fundamentally altering the fabric of life. It moved production from scattered cottages to concentrated factory sites, drawing people from rural areas into rapidly growing towns and cities. This migration created new social structures and challenges, as communities grappled with housing, sanitation, and the provision of public services for a burgeoning population. The economic power generated by steam-driven factories began to reshape Britain's place in the world, establishing it as the workshop of the world. Such innovations reveal the complexity of historical change. The continuous operation of these steam engines required a dedicated supply chain for both fuel and lubricants, and often a skilled mechanic on site to manage any issues. The development of specialized workshops and foundries capable of producing the high-quality iron and steel components needed for the engines was a crucial development. These places themselves became centers of innovation, where metalworkers and engineers refined their techniques, developing new methods for casting, forging, and machining. The progress of steam power was not just about the engine itself, but about the supporting industries and skilled labor that enabled its widespread adoption. The steady rhythm of the loom, a sound that had once signaled prosperity, now seemed to whisper of a coming change. For generations, families had worked their wool and flax at home, a craft passed down from parent to child. Yet the spinning wheel, once a common sight in every cottage, was beginning to appear less frequently. In its place, a new, clattering contraption was taking hold, its metal teeth devouring fiber with a speed and veracity that astonished onlookers. This was the spinning jenny, a marvel of ingenuity that allowed a single worker to spin multiple threads at once, a significant departure from the one thread at a time method of the traditional spinning wheel. The sheer volume of yarn this new machine could produce was unlike anything seen before, heralding a new era in textile production. The materials for this burgeoning industry were readily available, the wool from Britain's own sheep and, increasingly, cotton arriving from distant lands. However, the technical processes involved in transforming these raw fibers into finished cloth were undergoing a radical overhaul. The spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves around 1764, was an early step, but it still required a skilled hand to operate, and its output was relatively delicate. It was the development of further innovations that truly revolutionized the process. For instance, the water frame, conceived by Richard Arkwright in 1769, used rollers moving at different speeds to draw out the cotton fibers, creating a stronger, more durable yarn. This machine, requiring a steady flow of water to power it, led to the establishment of mills alongside rivers, changing the landscape and the patterns of work. These new machines demanded a different labor organization than the dispersed cottage system. Instead of families working at their own pace in their homes, people began to gather in centralized workshops and mills. This shift necessitated a new structure, with factory owners or their appointed overseers managing teams of workers. The pace of work was no longer dictated by the setting sun or personal inclination, but by the relentless drive of the machinery. This new factory discipline required a different mindset from the workers, who had to adapt to a structured, often demanding environment where their output was measured not just by their skill, but by their adherence to the machine's tempo. The challenges of this transition were considerable, both for the innovators and the workers. The initial materials for the machines themselves, largely wood and some iron, required skilled metal workers and carpenters to build and maintain. The sheer scale of building these water-powered mills, often large stone structures, demanded significant capital investment and engineering expertise. Furthermore, skilled handloom weavers, accustomed to their craft, found their livelihoods threatened as the output of machine-spun yarn increased dramatically, making hand spinning less economically viable. This created social friction, as traditional ways of life collided with the inexorable march of mechanization. The power source itself presented a unique set of considerations. The reliance on water meant that mills had to be situated near fast-flowing rivers, dictating where these new industrial centers would emerge. This often meant building in rural areas, drawing workers from farming communities, and creating entirely new settlements around the factories. The technical processes of harnessing water power involved building dams, leats, and water wheels, all of which required detailed surveying and construction. Ensuring a consistent water supply, especially during drier seasons or periods of ice, was a significant concern and a constant operational challenge for the mill owners. The output of these new spinning machines, particularly the water frame, produced a yarn strong enough for the warp threads in weaving, whereas the jenny's output was more suited for the weft. This meant that the next logical step in the mechanization process was to automate weaving itself. Inventors like Edmund Cartwright soon developed power looms, though these were initially crude and struggled to match the speed and quality of skilled handloom weavers. Nevertheless, the eventual success of the power loom would complete the mechanization of textile production, from raw fiber to finished cloth, all within the confines of the factory. The introduction of these machines also brought about new ways of handling materials. Cotton, being a key fiber, required efficient processing before spinning. This included cleaning and carding, processes that also saw the introduction of mechanical aids. The sheer volume of cotton needed spurred further developments in its cultivation and transport, connecting British factories to plantations in other parts of the world. The intricate technical processes of setting up and operating these machines required a specialized workforce, trained in the mechanics of the spinning jenny, the water frame, and later the power loom. The organization of labor within these mills was a stark contrast to the familial and largely independent nature of cottage industry. Workers, including women and children, were employed directly by the mill owner. Their days were long, often 12 to 14 hours, and punctuated by the strict rules of the factory. Challenges for these workers included dangerous machinery, exposure to cotton dust, which could lead to respiratory illnesses, and the repetitive nature of their tasks. A quirky detail often overlooked is that some of the earliest spinning jennies were small enough to be used in homes, but their wider adoption truly took off when larger, more powerful versions were developed for factory settings. The very rhythm of life shifted for communities that embraced this new textile manufacturing. Market towns that had previously relied on local trade now became hubs for the distribution of factory-made goods. The sound of the spinning wheel in the home, once a constant hum, began to fade, replaced by the louder, more insistent clatter from the mills. This transformation was not without its critics. Many traditional artisans lamented the loss of craftsmanship and the impersonal nature of factory work. They worried that the soul of the craft was being lost, replaced by a mechanical efficiency that cared little for the individual maker. Consider the sheer ingenuity required to build these early machines. The metal components had to be precisely shaped, often by hand, with the limited tools available at the time. The frame of the spinning jenny, for example, was typically made of wood, but the spindles and flyers that twisted the yarn were made of metal. The technical processes of metalworking were themselves advancing, driven in part by the demand for new machinery. The quality of the iron and the skill of the smith were paramount to creating machines that could withstand the stresses of constant operation. The introduction of the water frame, with its requirement for a continuous water supply, led to the development of mill villages. Entire communities sprang up around these factories, housing the workers and their families. This created a distinct social environment, separate from the traditional village structure. The labor organization extended to the management of these entire communities, with employers often providing housing, company stores, and even basic schooling, creating a paternalistic system that was both beneficial and controlling for the workers. The evolution of textile machinery sparked a lively debate among scholars and manufacturers of the time. Some argued that the quality of machine-spun yarn could never match that of hand-spun thread, while others championed the increased output and lower cost. This ongoing discussion highlights a central challenge of technological advancement: the balance between tradition and innovation and the impact on skilled labor. The debate continues even today, as we consider how automation affects human craftsmanship in various fields, asking whether efficiency should always be the primary goal. The process of cleaning and preparing raw cotton, essential before spinning, also saw significant mechanization. The cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in America around 1793, dramatically sped up the separation of cotton fibers from their seeds. While this invention was American, its impact was felt profoundly in Britain, as it made raw cotton far more plentiful and cheaper, fueling the expansion of British textile mills. This interconnectivity of invention and raw material supply is a key aspect of understanding this transformative period. The system of distributing these manufactured textiles also changed. Instead of local markets and traveling merchants, goods were increasingly sent to larger distribution centers or sold directly by the factory owners. The labor organization in trade expanded to include warehousemen, transporters, and clerks who managed the burgeoning trade. The sheer volume of cloth produced meant that Britain began to export textiles in unprecedented quantities, establishing its dominance in the global market. This expansion of trade itself relied on further innovations in shipping and logistics, a chain reaction of industrial progress. The social impact of this shift was profound. The availability of cheaper machine-made cloth made clothing more accessible to a wider range of people. This had implications for hygiene and fashion, as people could afford to own more garments and change them more frequently. The materials that went into clothing, from the thread to the dyes used to color the fabric, were all part of this expanding industrial system, creating a ripple effect through many sectors of the economy. The mechanization of spinning and weaving was not a single event, but a series of advancements building upon each other. Each new machine addressed a bottleneck or inefficiency in the previous stage of production. This systematic progression of innovation, driven by both practical need and inventive genius, exemplifies how technological progress often unfolds in a step-by-step manner, with each solution creating the conditions for the next challenge to be identified and overcome. This interconnectedness of invention is a fundamental aspect of industrial development. This examination illuminates broader forces that shape societies. The ability to fashion sturdy metals in quantities previously unimaginable formed the very sinews of Britain's ascendant power. For generations, iron had been coaxed from the earth, its production reliant on the dense forests that provided charcoal for smelting, a process both costly and limited by dwindling woodlands. This dependence created a bottleneck, a quiet restraint on the burgeoning ambitions of engineers and industrialists who saw the potential for stronger, more versatile materials. The very forests that once fueled ironworks were themselves a precious resource, their careful management becoming a concern as demand grew, showcasing an early tension between industrial growth and natural preservation. This concern about resource availability underscored the need for a more robust and plentiful source of fuel for iron making. Historical accounts indicate that the process of smelting iron ore, the separation of iron from rock, had long been refined but remained energy-intensive. Before the wider adoption of coke, a derivative of coal, the charcoal method required vast amounts of timber. Each ton of iron produced consumed a significant portion of a woodland, leading to concerns about deforestation and the sustainability of the practice. This reliance on charcoal also meant that iron production was often located near forests, geographically limiting where these vital materials could be made. The challenge, therefore, was not just in extracting the ore, but in finding a fuel source that could meet the ever-increasing appetite for iron without depleting the landscape. The transformation began with the gradual yet profound shift towards using coke, a processed form of coal, as the primary fuel for smelting iron. This change was not instantaneous. It involved the development of new furnace designs capable of withstanding the higher temperatures generated by coke and the mastery of techniques to purify the resulting iron. The puddling process, for instance, developed by Henry Cort in the 1780s, was a crucial technical innovation that allowed for the efficient removal of impurities from molten pig iron, producing wrought iron in much larger quantities than previously possible. This refinement of the smelting process directly addressed the limitations imposed by charcoal scarcity. The materials involved in this industrial alchemy were fundamental: iron ore, quarried from the earth, coal, mined from deep veins, and limestone, used as a flux to help separate impurities. These raw materials, once gathered, were fed into blast furnaces, towering structures built of brick and stone, designed to contain and direct immense heat. The sheer scale of these operations demanded a significant labor organization. Teams of workers, accustomed to the demanding physical work of mining and quarrying, were organized into shifts to maintain the continuous operation of the furnaces, often working in close proximity to intense heat. The technical processes within the ironworks were arduous and required specialized skills. Miners descended into the earth, their movements guided by lantern light, to extract iron ore and coal, their hands familiar with the rough textures of rock and seam. At the surface, the ore was often crushed and prepared before being loaded into the furnace along with coke and limestone. The furnace itself was a marvel of engineering for its time, designed to burn fuel intensely and produce molten iron. The raw materials' journey from earth to usable metal was a complex chain of carefully managed steps. The challenges faced by those involved in iron production were substantial. The extreme heat of the furnaces meant that workers often sought respite from the warmth by working in shifts or taking frequent breaks, their faces and hands showing the marks of their trade. The air around the ironworks was frequently filled with the sharp smell of burning coke and the faint metallic tang of heated iron. The sheer physicality of the labor, moving heavy materials and tending to the intense heat, demanded great stamina and resilience from the workforce. Safety was a constant underlying concern in this demanding environment. The impact of coke smelting and the puddling process was not confined to the ironworks themselves. It had a ripple effect across industries. The greatly increased availability of strong, malleable wrought iron meant that manufacturers could build more robust machinery, stronger ships, and more durable tools. This abundance of a key material fueled further innovation, creating a demand for more coal, more iron ore, and more skilled labor to extract and process them, setting in motion a cycle of industrial growth. The ability to produce iron efficiently directly translated into economic advantage and expansion. This surge in iron production created new forms of labor organization. The factory system, which was taking root in the textile industries, began to influence iron manufacturing as well. Workers were organized into teams, often under the supervision of foremen who understood the intricate processes of smelting and refining. These teams were responsible for specific tasks, such as tending the furnaces, shaping the molten metal, and preparing it for transport. The rhythm of their work was dictated by the demands of production and the continuous operation of the furnaces. The availability of plentiful and affordable iron paved the way for more ambitious engineering projects. Structures that had previously been built from stone or timber, limited by their inherent strength and the difficulty of shaping them, could now be constructed using iron. Bridges could span wider rivers, buildings could rise taller, and machinery could be made more powerful and reliable. This material revolution provided the very skeleton and framework for the infrastructure that would define the Victorian era. The sheer utility of the metal reshaped what was physically possible. Subsequently, the refinement of steel production, particularly the Bessemer process developed in the mid-19th century, further amplified this transformation. While iron was strong, steel offered even greater tensile strength and durability, making it ideal for applications like railway tracks and structural beams. The Bessemer process allowed for the mass production of steel by blowing air through molten pig iron to burn off impurities. This technical process dramatically lowered the cost of steel, making it accessible for a wide range of uses, building upon the foundation laid by iron. The materials required for this advanced steel production were similar to those for iron, but the technical processes involved were more precise, requiring careful control of temperature and airflow. The labor organization in steel mills also evolved, with highly specialized roles for those operating the converters and handling the molten metal. The intense heat, the noise of the machinery, and the constant movement of material created a demanding yet vital industrial environment. Workers required a keen understanding of the chemical and physical changes occurring within the molten mass. The challenges in scaling up steel production were significant, from ensuring the consistent quality of the raw materials to managing the immense heat and molten metal involved in the Bessemer process. Yet, the reward was a material that could bear greater loads and withstand more stress, essential for the next wave of industrial expansion and infrastructural development. The development of steel was a testament to the systematic pursuit of material science and its direct application to societal progress, providing the backbone for so much of the era's advancement. The ability to produce and shape iron and steel in such quantities fundamentally altered the landscape of Britain. It provided the building blocks for the railways that would crisscross the country, the ships that would sail the seas, and the machinery that would power factories and mines. This mastery over materials was not just about creating stronger objects. It was about enabling new possibilities, connecting distant places, and driving economic growth at an unprecedented scale. The widespread availability of these metals truly formed the backbone of the nation's progress. The systematic integration of iron and steel production showcases how advancements in material science and engineering can have profound and far-reaching effects. It illustrates how the careful organization of labor, the efficient use of resources, and the relentless pursuit of technical improvement can transform a nation's capabilities. The sheer volume and quality of iron and steel produced during this period not only built the physical infrastructure of the modern world, but also fostered a spirit of innovation and industrial confidence that would characterize the era. The iron and steel exemplifies how societies adapt to fundamental resource challenges. The iron and steel forged in the nation's furnaces now awaited a new purpose, a purpose that would stretch across the very landscape of Britain. With the advent of stronger, more malleable metals, the ambitious undertaking of railway construction began in earnest, a process that would fundamentally alter the way people and goods moved. The sheer scale of this endeavor, the laying of iron pathways that would connect distant towns and cities, demanded a systematic approach to engineering and a vast, often resilient workforce. This undertaking was not merely about placing rails. It involved a deep understanding of geography, a complex organization of labor, and the careful management of significant resources. The technical processes of railway construction were themselves a marvel of Victorian ingenuity, requiring meticulous planning and execution. Surveyors first charted the most feasible routes, a task that often involved navigating challenging terrains, from rolling hills to waterways, necessitating the creation of detailed maps. This initial mapping phase would determine where cuttings, deep channels carved into the earth, or embankments, raised earthen structures, would be needed to maintain a gentle gradient, essential for the steam engines to operate efficiently. These gradients were calculated with precision, ensuring that the locomotives, often referred to as iron horses, could pull their loads without undue strain, a testament to the scientific understanding being applied to practical problems. The materials required for this monumental task were substantial and demanding. Millions of tons of iron and increasingly steel were needed for the rails themselves, designed to withstand the immense pressures of passing trains. Timber was essential for the sleepers, the sturdy beams laid perpendicular to the rails, providing a stable foundation and maintaining the correct gauge, or distance, between the tracks. Furthermore, vast quantities of stone, gravel, and earth were mobilized for embankments, cuttings, and ballast, the crushed stone that filled the spaces between and under the sleepers, providing drainage and further stability. Acquiring and transporting these materials often involved navigating existing waterways and canals, or establishing temporary trackways to bring them to the construction sites. The labor organization for railway construction was one of the era's most visible manifestations of industrial-scale work. The backbone of this operation was the navvy, a term derived from navigator, who were originally canal diggers. These were men, often recruited from rural areas or migrating from Ireland, who performed the most arduous physical labor. They worked in large, organized gangs, overseen by foremen and contractors, their tasks divided from digging and blasting to bricklaying and track laying. This system, while effective in completing massive projects, often meant that these laborers faced incredibly demanding conditions, living in temporary camps near the work sites, a stark contrast to the settled lives they might have left behind. The challenges confronting railway builders were numerous and ever-present. Overcoming geographical obstacles was a constant struggle. Tunnels had to be bored through hillsides, often with rudimentary tools and in dangerous conditions where cave-ins were a frequent threat. And viaducts, bridges carrying railways over valleys or rivers, required skilled masonry and engineering to ensure their strength and longevity. Securing the land for the tracks also presented its own difficulties, involving complex negotiations with landowners and often lengthy legal processes. The passage of the Lands Clauses Consolidation Act of 1845, simplifying this to some extent by granting companies the power to purchase land compulsorily. The sheer scale of earth moved for a typical railway line was staggering, often involving the excavation of hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of soil and rock. Consider the process of digging a tunnel. Gangs of men, armed with picks and shovels, would begin excavating the earth. Where harder rock was encountered, blasting with gunpowder became necessary, a technique that required careful handling and precise placement to avoid uncontrolled collapses. The excavated spoil would then be removed, often by horse-drawn carts or on temporary rail lines, a constant stream of material leaving the site. This was a cycle of labor, danger, and relentless effort, performed by men whose names rarely made it into the official records of progress. One particularly engaging aspect of this construction was the development of specialized tools and techniques. For instance, the invention of the steam-powered excavator, or steam navvy, began to transform the scale of earth moving in the latter part of the era, significantly increasing efficiency compared to purely manual labor, though for a long time, skilled manual excavation was the primary method. Another key element was the development of the ballast wagon, essentially a flat cart designed to carry the stone used to bed the rails, which could be tipped to quickly distribute the material along the track bed. These advancements, while perhaps not as flashy as the locomotives themselves, were critical to the speed and viability of the entire enterprise. A rather unusual, yet significant, detail from this period relates to the practice of navvy holidays. When a particularly challenging section of track was completed, or a major tunnel breakthrough occurred, the workers would often be granted a brief respite. These holidays were not paid leave in the modern sense, but rather a temporary cessation of work, during which the navvies might celebrate their achievement, sometimes with considerable enthusiasm, and perhaps enjoy a local ale before returning to the arduous task at hand. Such moments provided a brief release from the intense physical demands of their work. A persistent scholarly debate surrounds the precise impact of railway construction on the landscape and the lives of those who lived in the areas through which the lines passed. While the economic benefits and increased connectivity are undeniable, some historians point to the disruptive effect on rural communities, the partitioning of farmland by new routes, and the imposition of a new industrial tempo on the countryside. Others emphasize the opportunities created, the jobs provided, and the integration of previously isolated areas into the national economy, a complex interplay of progress and displacement. The construction of bridges also presented a unique set of technical processes and challenges. For crossing rivers or valleys, engineers had to design structures that could bear immense weight and withstand the forces of nature. The use of iron girders and later steel allowed for the construction of far longer and stronger spans than were previously possible with stone or timber alone. The process of assembling these structures, often high above the ground, required intricate scaffolding and a skilled workforce capable of precise assembly, where a single misplaced rivet could have significant consequences. The sheer spectacle of a railway bridge emerging across a vast expanse was a powerful symbol of industrial might. The implementation of a standardized gauge for the rails, though debated at the time, was crucial for creating a coherent network. Once this standard was largely accepted, it meant that trains could travel across the country without needing to transfer passengers or goods, a significant improvement in efficiency. This standardization of a key component, much like the standardization of manufactured goods in other industries, was a vital step in enabling seamless national integration. The laying of the tracks themselves was a rhythmic, almost mechanical process. Sleepers were positioned at regular intervals, a specific distance apart to support the rails. Then the rails, often delivered in long lengths, were carefully placed and secured to the sleepers, usually with spikes or chairs, metal fittings that held the rail in place. This was followed by the filling of the ballast, the crushed stone, around and beneath the sleepers, ensuring a firm, level, and well-drained trackbed, ready to absorb the vibrations of the passing locomotives. It was a systematic, repetitive, and physically demanding task, requiring constant attention to detail to ensure the safety and smooth operation of the railways. These engineering feats, undertaken across the nation, were not just about connecting places. They were about reshaping the very fabric of Britain. The railways facilitated the movement of raw materials to factories and finished goods to markets at unprecedented speed and scale. They enabled people to travel for leisure and work more easily than ever before, contributing to social change and the growth of suburbs. The sheer audacity and success of these railway construction projects cemented Britain's reputation as a leader in engineering and industrial capability, laying down the physical arteries that would serve the nation for generations to come. These logistical demands and the sheer human effort involved in connecting the country by rail truly highlight the systematic nature of Victorian industrial ambition. The quiet hum of the telegraph key was a sound entirely new to the world, a stark contrast to the hurried clatter of hooves or the rumble of carts that had, until then, been the fastest means of relaying news across distances. This chapter explores the introduction of the electric telegraph, a system built upon ingenious processes that drastically reshaped communication. The foundational technical processes involved harnessing electricity, a force then only beginning to be understood, to send coded messages through miles of wire. Early pioneers meticulously worked with copper, a relatively scarce and costly material, to craft the conductive pathways that would bind the nation and then the world. The labor organization required a specialized skill set, bringing together electricians who understood the flow of current, engineers who designed the complex relay systems, and dedicated operators who learned to interpret the rhythmic clicks. One of the primary challenges lay in the very nature of electricity itself, its unseen power, its tendency to dissipate, and the immense difficulty in transmitting it reliably over long distances, especially where the very Earth itself posed an obstacle. Building the infrastructure meant laying miles of wire, often on wooden poles, a painstaking process that demanded careful surveying and constant maintenance to ward off weather and damage. The initial investment for such an undertaking was considerable, requiring a convergence of capital from investors who saw the potential to revolutionize business and governance. The methodical work of securing land rights, erecting poles, and stringing the conductive copper wire represented a significant logistical effort, organizing teams of workers for tasks that were both delicate and physically demanding. The advent of the telegraph brought with it a new rhythm to the flow of information, a stark departure from the days when news traveled at the pace of a horse. This shift presented immediate challenges for established communication methods, as the speed of electrical transmission made traditional mail services seem incredibly sluggish for urgent matters. The materials involved in the telegraph apparatus itself were also complex, requiring finely tuned electromagnets, precisely crafted keys, and reliable battery sources to generate the electrical current. The organization of labor extended beyond the installation crews to the telegraph operators, individuals who mastered the intricate dance of the Morse code, tapping out messages with a speed and accuracy that was, in its own way, a new form of artisanal skill. The development of this technology meant that information, whether a stock market fluctuation or a governmental decree, could traverse the country in mere minutes rather than days. This transformation directly impacted the processes of commerce, allowing for quicker decisions in trading and a more responsive approach to market changes. The labor organization within businesses adapted, with clerks and managers relying on the telegraph to receive and send dispatches, altering their daily routines and decision-making timelines. The materials used in business transactions, like bills of lading and financial reports, began to be transmitted electronically, reducing reliance on physical paper. However, the inherent challenges of early telegraphy were significant. The wires were susceptible to breakage from storms, and the electrical signals could be weakened over long distances, requiring intermediate relay stations manned by operators who would retransmit the messages. This created a need for a robust network of trained personnel, a new category of skilled labor dedicated to the maintenance and operation of this burgeoning communication system. The technical processes of repairing damaged lines in remote areas or troubleshooting equipment failures demanded resourcefulness and a deep understanding of the electrical principles at play. This reliance on a continuous, unbroken line of copper wire to carry messages introduced a different kind of vulnerability than that faced by older communication forms. A single severed wire in a remote location could disrupt service for vast areas, necessitating a coordinated labor organization focused on rapid repair and maintenance. The materials required for these repairs were as varied as the problems encountered, from lengths of new wire to insulating tape and tools for splicing connections. The challenges extended to securing the poles themselves against tampering or accidental damage, often requiring dedicated patrols or agreements with landowners along the route. The impact on governance was equally profound, with the ability to issue commands and receive reports altering the processes of national administration and military strategy. The speed at which news of events, both domestic and international, could be disseminated meant that policy could be made and executed with an unprecedented responsiveness. The materials of governance, from official dispatches to diplomatic correspondence, began to flow through these wires, bypassing the slower postal routes. This reliance also presented challenges in ensuring the accuracy and security of the transmitted information, leading to the development of private codes and encryption methods. The adoption of the telegraph was not without its detractors or its complexities, as society grappled with this new mode of instant connection. The technical processes of encoding and decoding messages required specialized knowledge, and the sheer volume of information being transmitted created new administrative challenges for managing the flow. The labor organization involved not only the linesmen and operators, but also the clerks who transcribed the received messages and integrated them into existing business or governmental workflows, demanding a rapid adaptation to this new form of data processing. One could ask how societies previously managed governance and commerce without such immediate connection. The answer lies in the slow, deliberate nature of older methods, which fostered a different kind of patience and strategic planning. The introduction of the telegraph effectively compressed time, altering expectations and accelerating the pace of decision-making across all sectors. The materials of this new information age, primarily copper wire and specialized electrical equipment, began to transform economies, driving demand for these specific resources. The labor organization also saw the emergence of a new administrative layer dedicated to the telegraph companies themselves, managing operations, billing, and customer relations. The challenges for these companies included competition, the ever-present need for infrastructure expansion to reach new markets, and the ongoing technical processes of improving the reliability and speed of their systems. Each successful transmission across vast distances was a testament to the cumulative effort and ingenuity of those involved. The systematic nature of laying the wires, the precise calibration of the electrical equipment, and the disciplined learning of Morse code all speak to a new era of organized effort focused on technological advancement. The materials used were not just copper and wood, but also the scientific knowledge that underpinned the understanding of electricity. The challenges inherent in mastering this new medium spurred innovation in electrical engineering and signal processing, laying groundwork for future communication marvels. As the network expanded, so too did the processes of its management, requiring a more sophisticated approach to maintenance, fault detection, and the efficient routing of messages. The labor organization evolved to include specialized fault locators and repair crews who could be dispatched quickly to address issues affecting the lines. The materials they carried to sites were diagnostic tools and replacement components, essential for restoring service and maintaining the integrity of the system. This revolutionary technology, born from intricate technical processes and demanding meticulous labor organization, transformed the very fabric of how people in Britain and beyond interacted. The materials that enabled this instant communication, primarily copper wire, became symbols of progress and connection. The challenges overcome were immense, yet the benefits in speed and reach were undeniable. Modern research continues to uncover new dimensions of these communication networks. The vastness of the British Empire, stretching across continents, demanded intricate administrative processes to manage its diverse territories and populations. Following the earlier discussions on industrial might and expanding communication networks, attention now turns to how this global reach was maintained, a system built on carefully organized administration. The materials of empire were not just manufactured goods or raw resources, but also the legal frameworks, decrees, and treaties that defined its reach and governed its inhabitants. These documents, written with ink on paper, formed the invisible infrastructure binding disparate regions to London, a complex legal and bureaucratic web. Within these administrative structures, a particular kind of labor organization emerged. Colonial administrators, governors, and their staff, often drawn from the burgeoning middle classes or the aristocracy, were responsible for implementing policies, collecting revenue, and maintaining order in lands far from home. They worked alongside local intermediaries, individuals who understood the customs and languages of the territories, bridging cultural divides and enabling the functioning of the imperial apparatus. This layered approach to labor was essential, as direct oversight from Britain was often impractical given the immense distances involved. Challenges in governing such an enormous and varied empire were manifold. Vast distances meant that news and instructions traveled slowly, often taking months to reach their destination. And similarly, reports from the colonies faced the same lengthy journey back to the metropole. This temporal lag created significant difficulties in responding to events, managing crises, or even implementing routine administrative tasks efficiently. Maintaining control and projecting authority across such a wide geographic expanse required constant effort and adaptation. The technical processes involved in colonial administration were largely those of communication. Despite the slow pace of physical travel, the era saw advancements in naval technology, allowing for more regular passage of ships carrying dispatches and personnel. The meticulous process of drafting laws, cataloging land ownership, and recording population data formed the backbone of governance, creating extensive archives that documented the empire's administration and its impact on local societies. These records were crucial for understanding the complex web of obligations and rights that defined colonial rule. For example, in the Indian subcontinent, the East India Company, even before direct crown rule, developed sophisticated systems for surveying land and assessing taxes. These processes, while often serving imperial interests, involved meticulous cataloging of agricultural output and land tenure. The materials used included detailed maps, written records of land ownership transfers, and official pronouncements translated into local languages. The labor organization saw British officials overseeing Indian clerks and surveyors who performed the on-the-ground work of data collection, a necessary collaboration in a land with such a deeply entrenched local structure. However, these administrative processes were not without their difficulties. The challenges of imposing foreign legal and administrative systems on established indigenous structures were considerable. Local customs and traditions often clashed with imperial mandates, leading to misunderstandings and resistance. For instance, land ownership practices that were communal in nature in some regions were difficult to reconcile with the British emphasis on private property, creating fertile ground for disputes that required delicate negotiation or, at times, forceful intervention. The establishment of order often relied on the presence of military forces, but administrative control was the more pervasive tool of imperial governance. Officials were tasked with establishing infrastructure like roads and telegraph lines, not only for communication, but also to facilitate the movement of troops and goods. The technical processes here involved engineering and construction, often utilizing local labor under British supervision, demonstrating how different facets of the empire's reach were interconnected through shared objectives and resource management. One particularly unusual challenge arose from the sheer diversity of peoples and cultures administered. Administrators had to grapple with vastly different legal traditions, religious practices, and social hierarchies. The process of creating uniform laws or administrative structures across regions with such distinct backgrounds was a monumental undertaking. This often led to policies that, while perhaps logical from a British perspective, were perceived as alien or unjust by local populations, sparking dissent and requiring continuous adaptation, or, conversely, a hardening of imperial resolve. A curious aspect of colonial administration was the attempt to replicate British social customs and institutions in distant lands. This included the establishment of clubs, schools, and even sports like cricket, which were seen as markers of civilization and belonging. The materials for these endeavors, books, sports equipment, educational supplies, were often imported, underscoring the effort to transplant British life wholesale. The labor organization here involved establishing educational systems staffed by both British expatriates and, increasingly, locally educated individuals trained in British methods. Scholars continue to debate the precise motivations and outcomes of these administrative processes. Some emphasize the economic imperatives, viewing colonial rule primarily as a means of securing resources and markets for British industry. Others highlight the perceived civilizing mission, arguing that administrators genuinely believed they were bringing progress and order to less developed regions. A more nuanced view acknowledges the interplay of these factors, suggesting that economic interests were often intertwined with a paternalistic ideology that justified imperial expansion. It is a complex tapestry of ambition, practicality that continues to be unraveled. The challenges of governance were also compounded by the sheer scale of the undertaking. The need to manage vast territories with limited personnel meant that delegated authority was a necessity, leading to the development of complex hierarchies and reporting structures. The technical processes of communication, such as the use of official gazettes to announce new regulations, or the detailed preparation of reports for Parliament, were critical in maintaining a semblance of central control over far-flung territories. The sheer volume of paperwork generated by such an extensive administrative network is a testament to the effort involved. The systematic administration of the empire was a continuous process of adaptation. As new territories were acquired, or as existing ones presented new issues, the administrative machinery had to adjust. This included the development of specialized departments to deal with issues like trade, justice, or public works within the colonies. The labor organization within Britain itself also grew to support this vast enterprise, with ministries in London dedicated to overseeing colonial affairs, coordinating policy, and managing the flow of information and resources. The impact of these processes extended beyond the political and economic spheres, influencing the cultural and social fabric of both Britain and its colonies. The administrative structures established, the legal frameworks implemented, and the social norms that were promoted all left an indelible mark. The materials that flowed through these channels, ideas, goods, and people, transformed societies in ways that are still felt today. Understanding these intricate administrative systems is crucial for grasping the full scope of Britain's imperial reach and its lasting global consequences. The detailed reports from administrators in territories such as Canada or Australia concerning land settlement and infrastructure development reveal layers of meaning that scholars still examine. The factory floor hummed not with the song of the shuttle or the clatter of the loom, but with the rhythmic pulse of machines directed by human hands. Within these large, organized spaces, the very nature of work transformed, shifting from the independent rhythm of the home workshop to the structured cadence dictated by the factory bell. This transition meant a new way of life for many, a systematic reordering of daily existence driven by the demands of industrial production. The core of this shift lay in the processes of labor organization. Instead of artisans controlling their pace and methods, workers were assigned specific, often repetitive tasks within a larger production chain. This division of labor, a key innovation in factory management, meant that a single pair of hands might only perform one small step in creating a finished product, from preparing raw cotton to spinning thread, then weaving it into cloth. This specialization, while increasing output, also altered the skill set required and the sense of accomplishment derived from a finished piece. The materials that flowed through these factories were now processed on a scale previously unimaginable. Mountains of raw cotton, bales of wool, and vast quantities of iron ore were the lifeblood of these industrial centers, each requiring careful handling before being fed into the whirring, grinding machinery. The sheer volume of these raw goods, their movement, and their transformation became a central focus of the factory's daily operations, managed with meticulous attention to prevent bottlenecks or shortages. The technical processes within the factory were designed for maximum efficiency and uniformity. Machines, whether the spinning jenny that produced multiple threads at once or the power loom that wove fabric with tireless speed, required constant tending. Operators learned specific ways to feed materials, adjust settings, and clear jams, their actions dictated by the machine's operation rather than their own intuition alone. This systematic interaction between worker and machine defined the new industrial workplace. One significant challenge for both owners and workers was the strict adherence to time. The factory whistle, a sound that marked the beginning and end of the workday, became a powerful symbol of this new discipline. Workers who arrived late could face fines or dismissal, and even short breaks were regulated. This imposed rhythm was a stark contrast to the more flexible hours often found in earlier artisanal or agricultural work. The sheer number of people gathered within these factory walls presented further organizational hurdles. Overseers and foremen were tasked with managing large groups, ensuring they followed procedures and maintaining order. This created a distinct hierarchy within the factory, with owners and managers at the top, followed by various levels of supervisors, and then the mass of workers performing the manual tasks. The labor organization extended to how workers were compensated. Wages were often paid by the hour or by the piece, tying income directly to the amount of work produced or time spent on the factory floor. This system introduced a new form of economic dependency, where a worker's livelihood was directly linked to the continuous operation of the factory and the ever-present demand for goods. Challenges for the workforce were many, ranging from the inherent dangers of operating powerful machinery to the long hours and the often monotonous nature of the work. Accidents could lead to severe injury or loss of life, and there was little in the way of safety nets or support for those who are hurt. The environmental conditions inside many factories also pose difficulties, with noise levels and the presence of dust or fumes often making the workday uncomfortable. Yet, this systematic approach to labor organization also facilitated remarkable levels of production. The ability to coordinate the efforts of hundreds, sometimes thousands of workers, each performing a specialized task, allowed for the creation of goods on an unprecedented scale. This efficiency was the driving force behind Britain's industrial might, making products like textiles more affordable and accessible to a wider population than ever before. This transformation in how work was organized, from the individual craftsman to the collective factory hand, profoundly reshaped society. It created new social classes, established new rhythms of daily life, and set the stage for ongoing debates about the rights and conditions of labor. Understanding these intricate processes of factory production and workforce management offers a vital perspective on the human element at the heart of industrial advancement. How did this shift in the nature of work affect the daily lives and family structures of those involved? The systematic arrangement of individuals within these industrial behemoths, each a cog in a larger machine, reflects a profound human adaptation to new technological realities. This factory system represents a pivotal human endeavor in harnessing collective effort for material production. The intricate processes of British law and justice underwent significant refinement as the Victorian era dawned, a crucial evolution that mirrored the nation's rapid expansion. Following the broad strokes of parliamentary reform, the systems designed to maintain order and adjudicate disputes required equally careful attention, for even the most comprehensive laws proved ineffective without robust mechanisms for their application. The sheer volume of printed statutes, official documents, and legal precedents formed the fundamental materials of this evolving judicial landscape, requiring dedicated labor organization among clerks, barristers, and judges to manage and interpret them. A constant challenge was adapting a legal framework that had long served a different social order to the realities of burgeoning cities and a rapidly industrializing society, a task that often sparked heated debates among those responsible for its direction. The technical processes involved in evidence gathering to courtroom procedure were slowly being standardized, a gradual but essential step in ensuring fairness. This period saw the systematic development of policing, a departure from the older system of parish constables, who often relied on community watchfulness. The formation of the Metropolitan Police Force in 1829, though just before Victoria's reign, set a vital precedent, establishing a professional, uniformed body responsible for maintaining public order in London. The organization of these new police forces involved meticulous recruitment, training in new patrol techniques, and the development of clear lines of command, a considerable undertaking. The materials they used included simple batons, early forms of communication like whistles, and notebooks for recording incidents, all managed under the guidance of commissioners. The labor organization demanded a different kind of dedication from its men, often drawn from the working classes, but requiring discipline and adherence to strict regulations, a significant contrast to the more informal methods of the past. The challenges faced by these early constables were considerable. They had to gain the trust of the public while confronting rising crime rates in crowded urban areas, and they often worked under the scrutiny of a populace accustomed to less formal methods of law enforcement. The sheer density of populations in cities like Manchester and Birmingham meant that patrols were constantly engaged, and the technical processes of investigation, from securing crime scenes to interviewing witnesses, were rudimentary and evolving. Yet, this systematic approach laid the groundwork for modern policing, a process that transformed how society responded to transgression and sought to protect its citizens. one can imagine the unique sound of their heavy boots on cobblestones, a new and constant rhythm in the city. Moving through the courts, the processes of dispensing justice also underwent transformation. The establishment of new courts, such as the Central Criminal Court in London, aimed to centralize and streamline the handling of more serious offenses. This involved careful labor organization among clerks and legal professionals to manage case dockets, prepare indictments, and ensure that court proceedings followed established protocols. The materials here were abundant. Stacks of paper detailing charges, evidence presented in written form, and the physical structure of the courtroom itself, designed for orderly presentation. The challenges included ensuring that defendants received a fair hearing and that justice was administered without undue delay, a common criticism of the older, more cumbersome legal procedures. The introduction of new legal precedents and the codification of certain statutes represented key technical processes in refining the law. These efforts aimed to make the legal system more predictable and accessible, although the complexity of legal language remained a significant barrier for many. Historical accounts reveal the particular difficulties faced by those who could not afford legal counsel, a persistent challenge that led to debates about the fairness of the system. The intricate labor organization within the legal profession itself, from barristers specializing in particular areas of law to the judges who interpreted and applied it, formed a hierarchy designed to ensure expertise and methodical judgment. This era saw a growing understanding that punishment alone was not always the answer to crime, sparking a scholarly debate about rehabilitation. While some advocates pushed for harsher penalties as a deterrent, others began to explore reformative measures, suggesting that the processes of imprisonment should include opportunities for learning and moral instruction. The materials for such reform might include books, tools for vocational training within prisons, and the employment of chaplains and teachers, all requiring a coordinated labor organization. However, the challenges in implementing such programs were substantial, often facing resistance from those who viewed prisons purely as places of retribution and from the sheer logistical difficulty of managing such diverse activities within penal institutions. The development of a more formalized system for collecting evidence and presenting it in court also marked a significant step. This involved meticulous processes of documentation, ensuring that witness testimonies and physical evidence were recorded accurately and kept secure. The materials used ranged from ink and paper for written statements to early forms of forensic analysis, though this latter era was still in its infancy. The labor organization of constables and clerks in preparing these case files was essential, requiring precision and attention to detail. The primary challenge was to standardize these procedures across different jurisdictions, ensuring that evidence collected in one town would be admissible in another. Furthermore, the sheer expansion of the British Empire necessitated a parallel evolution in legal and administrative processes. Governing distant territories required the extension of British law, often adapted to local customs and conditions, a complex undertaking. The materials for imperial administration were vast, including treaties, proclamations, and records of colonial governance, all requiring careful management. The labor organization within the colonial service was diverse, encompassing administrators, legal officers, and local intermediaries, all working to uphold British authority and its legal framework. A persistent challenge was the vast distance and the varying levels of societal development across these territories, making uniform application of law incredibly difficult. In Britain itself, the growth of professional bodies and associations played a crucial role in standardizing legal practices and sharing knowledge. These organizations facilitated the processes of legal education and ethical development, helping to raise the overall quality of legal services. The materials they produced included professional journals, handbooks on legal practice, and standards for courtroom conduct. The labor organization within these professional groups involved committees, elected officials, and contributing members, all working to advance their collective interests and uphold the integrity of the legal profession. The challenges often centered on adapting to new legislation or responding to public criticism of the legal system. The Victorian era witnessed a fascinating tension between the desire for a more efficient modern legal system and the deeply ingrained traditions of English common law. This created a continuous challenge for lawmakers and judges seeking to balance progress with continuity. The processes of legal reform were therefore often incremental, built upon layers of precedent and careful consideration of past practices. The materials of this debate were found in parliamentary records, legal commentaries, and public discourse, reflecting a society actively engaged with the principles of justice and order. The intricate labor organization of legal scholars and reformers was vital in shaping these ongoing discussions and driving necessary changes. The sheer scale of change meant that new legal frameworks had to be created to address novel situations arising from industrialization and urban growth, such as public health regulations and factory safety laws. These required detailed technical processes for their drafting and implementation, often involving consultation with experts in relevant fields. The materials used in these new statutes were drawn from practical experience and scientific understanding, aiming to regulate complex new industries and their societal impact. The labor organization of parliamentary committees and government departments became increasingly specialized to handle this growing body of legislation. A curious aspect of this period was the ongoing fascination with the arcane legal processes that still persisted, such as the ancient guilds and their specific regulations, which sometimes clashed with broader legal reforms. This created quirky challenges for those trying to harmonize the old with the new. Meanwhile, the systematic efforts to create a more unified and accessible legal system for all citizens continued, a testament to the era's commitment to progress. These systemic insights contribute to our understanding of how legal frameworks adapt to societal evolution. The Great Reform Act of 1832 had begun to shift the balance of power, opening the doors of Parliament to a wider, though still limited, electorate, and this reform laid crucial groundwork for the societal shifts that would define the coming era. As Britain navigated these governmental adjustments, a new social stratum began to crystallize, one that would profoundly influence the nation's character: the middle class. This burgeoning group comprised individuals who found their prosperity not in inherited titles or land, but in commerce, trade, and the burgeoning professions that accompanied the nation's industrial and technological leaps. Their rise was a complex process, woven from threads of new economic opportunities and a distinct set of aspirations that set them apart from both the aristocracy and the working masses. The very materials that signified status and belonging for this emerging class were themselves markers of their changing fortunes. Unlike the landed gentry who displayed wealth through sprawling estates and ancestral portraits, the middle classes showcased their success through meticulously furnished homes filled with mass-produced yet well-crafted furniture, a growing library of printed books, and the finest textiles available for clothing and domestic use. These were materials acquired through diligent saving and prudent investment, reflecting a culture that valued tangible evidence of hard work and financial acumen, a stark contrast to the inherited privilege of their social superiors. This accumulation of domestic goods and personal effects became a visual language of their upward mobility. The labor organization that defined the middle classes was fundamentally different from that of the industrial worker or the agricultural laborer. While factory owners and merchants oversaw considerable workforces, their own daily efforts were often centered on intellectual pursuits, financial management, and the cultivation of professional networks. Clerks, accountants, engineers, lawyers, doctors, and shopkeepers formed the backbone of this group, engaging in work that required education, specialized skills, and often a degree of autonomy. This was a class built on service, expertise, and the management of capital, rather than the direct application of manual strength. This rise was not without its challenges, chief among them the aspiration to achieve and maintain social respectability. The middle classes, keen to distinguish themselves from the working poor and eager to prove their worthiness to the established aristocracy, often adhered to strict codes of conduct, morality, and etiquette. Propriety in dress, speech, and domestic life became paramount, with a strong emphasis on religious observance and charitable work as markers of good character. This careful curation of outward appearance and behavior was a continuous effort to solidify their social standing and gain acceptance within the broader societal structure. The technical processes that facilitated this social mobility were intrinsically linked to the wider industrial and commercial revolution. The expansion of banking and credit systems provided the capital necessary for ambitious individuals to start businesses or invest in new ventures, a crucial step in moving beyond mere subsistence. Furthermore, improvements in printing and the widespread availability of newspapers and journals allowed for the dissemination of ideas and information, fostering a culture of self-improvement and professional development that was vital for advancing one's career. The ability to access and process information became a key asset. This societal shift meant that the very definition of success began to broaden beyond land ownership or noble birth. For a family in a bustling town like Manchester, a father who managed a successful textile warehouse, or a mother who oversaw a well-appointed household where servants performed domestic tasks represented a significant achievement. Their children would likely receive formal schooling, perhaps even attend university, preparing them for professions that offered a comfortable income and a recognized place within the social hierarchy. This was a dynamic process, driven by economic opportunity and a conscious effort to build a better future. The increasing wealth and influence of this group naturally led to greater participation in civic life and a demand for political representation that aligned with their interests. They were the principal architects of new voluntary associations, from scientific societies and philanthropic organizations to political reform groups. This active engagement in public life was another facet of their growing prominence, demonstrating a desire not only for economic advancement but also for a voice in shaping the nation's destiny. Their collective action often pushed for policies that supported trade, education, and efficient governance, reflecting their own priorities. Within their homes, a distinct culture began to flourish. The parlor became a focal point, a space for receiving guests, displaying family portraits, and engaging in genteel leisure activities such as reading aloud or playing music. These domestic rituals reinforced family bonds and social connections, serving as both private sanctuaries and public demonstrations of their cultivated lifestyle. The careful arrangement of furniture, the display of decorative arts, and the meticulous upkeep of the home all contributed to an image of order, prosperity, and moral uprightness. This burgeoning middle class also became significant consumers of culture. The growth of libraries, public lectures, and affordable theater and music hall performances provided new avenues for entertainment and intellectual engagement. They embraced technological innovations like the improved gas lighting that illuminated their streets and homes, and the burgeoning railway networks that allowed for travel and leisure. This widespread adoption of new technologies and cultural forms was a testament to their forward-looking outlook and their desire to experience the benefits of progress. However, this upward mobility also created new social distinctions and sometimes friction. While the middle classes often championed meritocracy, their separation from the working classes was pronounced, with different lifestyles, expectations, and even moral judgments applied to each group. The desire to maintain social distance could manifest in exclusive clubs, residential segregation in developing urban areas, and a general reluctance to associate too closely with those who worked with their hands. This stratification, born from economic disparity, shaped urban landscapes and social interactions in profound ways. This era saw the systematic development of educational institutions aimed at preparing the next generation for professional roles, from grammar schools to specialized colleges. The technical processes of learning, assessment, and qualification became increasingly formalized, providing clear pathways for advancement. The drive for self-improvement and the acquisition of knowledge was not just a personal aspiration. It was a collective endeavor that fueled the growth of professions and contributed to Britain's intellectual and industrial leadership. This emphasis on education was a cornerstone of their societal ascent, a deliberate investment in human capital. The evidence from this period of social transformation continues to inform scholarly understanding of class formation and its impact on national identity. The systematic cultivation of innovation during this period, as we have seen with the advancements in steam power and textiles, created a fertile ground for scientific inquiry and invention. This fertile ground necessitated new processes for nurturing burgeoning ideas, moving beyond isolated workshops to more organized systems of research and development. The materials of innovation were no longer just metal and wood. They included knowledge itself, meticulously recorded and shared, alongside specialized instruments and laboratory apparatus. The labor organization shifted, bringing together minds that had previously worked in solitude, fostering collaboration among inventors, scientists, and skilled artisans, all driven by the desire to unlock nature's secrets and apply them for practical gain. However, significant challenges remained, including the often limited funding for experimental work and the difficulty in translating theoretical breakthroughs into tangible, marketable products. This period saw the establishment of dedicated scientific institutions and societies, formalizing the networks that had previously been more informal. These bodies acted as crucial hubs for the sharing of information, with regular meetings, demonstrations, and the publication of research papers. The processes involved were rigorous. Experiments had to be reproducible, and findings subjected to peer review before being widely accepted, a vital step in building a reliable body of scientific knowledge. The materials used in these new scientific endeavors were increasingly refined, from precise measuring tools to chemical compounds prepared with greater purity, allowing for more accurate and repeatable experiments. The labor organization here involved a more structured hierarchy of researchers, assistants, and technicians, each playing a specific role in the scientific method. The challenges of securing financial backing for pure research were a persistent concern. Inventors and scientists often relied on the patronage of wealthy individuals, industrial magnates, or government grants, which were not always readily available or sufficient. Despite this, the sheer volume of new discoveries and inventions continued to grow, a testament to the persistence of those involved. The establishment of patent offices provided a legal framework for protecting intellectual property, encouraging further innovation by allowing inventors to profit from their creations. And these offices themselves represented a significant bureaucratic process. Indeed, the very processes of invention became more systematized. inventors began to think not just of a single discovery, but of a series of improvements or related technologies. The development of electric telegraphy, for example, was not the work of one person, but built upon earlier investigations into electricity and magnetism, and subsequently spurred further innovations in electrical engineering. The materials used in these early electrical experiments included various metals for conductivity, glass for insulation, and chemicals for batteries, all requiring careful sourcing and handling by skilled technicians. The labor organization within these emerging electrical industries often involved engineers and electricians working closely to test and refine new devices. A particular challenge lay in the public's understanding and acceptance of these new technologies. Many found the rapid pace of change bewildering, and some technologies, like photography, were initially viewed with suspicion. For instance, early photographic processes, such as the daguerreotype, required long exposure times and the use of hazardous chemicals, making the practice demanding and somewhat arcane to the uninitiated. Nevertheless, the ability to capture likenesses with such accuracy represented a profound shift in art and documentation. This particular technique, the daguerreotype, involved exposing a silver-plated copper sheet to iodine vapor to make it light-sensitive, then exposing it in a camera, and finally developing the latent image with mercury vapor, followed by fixing it with a salt solution. The systematic application of scientific principles to practical problems became a hallmark of the era, driving advancements across numerous fields. Consider the meticulous processes involved in cartography and surveying, which were essential for mapping newly explored territories and planning infrastructure projects like canals and railways. The materials used were paper, ink, surveying instruments like theodolites and chains, and later, more precise measuring devices. The labor organization involved trained surveyors, draftsmen, and laborers who worked together to create accurate maps and plans, often under demanding physical conditions, as they traversed varied and sometimes difficult terrain. These endeavors were not without their challenges, including the sheer physical labor required and the potential for error in complex calculations and measurements. Yet the quest for precision was paramount, as inaccuracies could lead to costly mistakes in construction or misrepresentation of geographical data. One rather quirky historical fact is that some early surveyors used knotted ropes, carefully measured, to determine distances across uneven ground, a testament to ingenuity when more sophisticated tools were not yet widely available or affordable. This painstaking work formed the bedrock upon which many of the era's great engineering feats were built. The dissemination of scientific knowledge also underwent a transformation. Periodicals dedicated to science and technology flourished, providing a platform for inventors to share their findings and for the public to learn about new discoveries. The processes of publication involved editors, printers, and distributors, all working to ensure that information reached a wide audience. The materials were paper, ink, and printing presses, which themselves benefited from technological improvements. The labor organization within the publishing industry grew, creating new employment opportunities for those involved in bringing scientific ideas to the public. One ongoing scholarly debate centers on the extent to which individual genius versus collaborative effort drove innovation. While figures like Michael Faraday or Charles Babbage are rightly celebrated, their work was often supported by a network of assistants and collaborators and built upon the discoveries of others. The processes of scientific discovery were becoming less about solitary flashes of insight and more about incremental progress within established disciplines. The materials for collaboration included shared laboratory spaces, libraries, and correspondence networks. The labor organization thus evolved to encompass teams of researchers, each contributing their specialized skills. This move towards more organized research and development also meant that the challenges of scaling up production became more apparent. An invention that worked perfectly in a small laboratory setting might present entirely new problems when manufactured on a larger scale. This required closer integration between scientific development and industrial engineering. The materials for larger-scale production often differed, demanding greater quantities and perhaps less refined but more readily available resources. The labor organization within factories had to adapt to working with new machinery and processes dictated by the scientific innovations. The establishment of university science departments and research laboratories further solidified these innovative processes. These institutions provided formal training in scientific methods and offered facilities for advanced study and experimentation. The materials available within these academic settings were typically the most up-to-date and specialized, attracting bright minds eager to push the boundaries of knowledge. The labor organization here involved professors, postdoctoral researchers, and graduate students, all engaged in the pursuit of scientific understanding. However, the challenges of academia, such as securing consistent funding and balancing theoretical exploration with practical application, were ever present. A fascinating, though perhaps less discussed, aspect of this period is the rise of gentleman scientists, individuals with private means who pursued scientific research out of curiosity and intellectual interest, often contributing valuable observations and experiments that might not have had immediate commercial application. This voluntary scientific labor organization, while informal, was a significant contributor to the era's intellectual output. These organized efforts in scientific and technological innovation, from the drawing board to the laboratory bench and finally to the factory floor, demonstrate recurring patterns in human civilization's quest for progress.
The rapid growth of cities brought with it the pressing need for better systems to manage waste and supply clean water, a crucial undertaking for public well-being. This necessitated a systematic approach to urban planning, moving beyond haphazard expansion to consider the health and daily lives of the people inhabiting these burgeoning metropolises. The sheer volume of people moving into towns like Manchester and London created new challenges, requiring organized solutions for sanitation that had not been considered on such a scale before. The foundations of modern public health were being laid during this period, as authorities grappled with the consequences of industrialization and population density, realizing that infrastructure was as vital as factories and trade. The processes involved in creating these new urban systems were complex and required the application of newly understood scientific principles, particularly in the realms of hydrology and engineering. Engineers and planners had to meticulously survey land, design pipe networks, and construct reservoirs and treatment facilities, utilizing the available materials like iron for pipes and brick and stone for buildings. The labor organization shifted from the individual crafts that built older cities to large, coordinated teams of laborers and skilled tradespeople, all working under the direction of supervisors and project managers. These large-scale projects were undertaken with a methodical pace, reflecting the systematic nature of the task at hand. One significant challenge lay in the sheer expense and the immense scale of the undertaking, which often required substantial investment from local governments and sometimes private enterprise. Securing the necessary funds was a continuous process, and debates often arose regarding the best methods for financing such large public works. Furthermore, the technical processes of laying vast networks of pipes beneath already built-up areas were fraught with difficulty, often disrupting existing streets and businesses and requiring careful planning to minimize inconvenience. The materials used, while robust, were also heavy and difficult to transport and install, demanding significant physical effort from the workforces.
one significant challenge lay in the sheer expense and the immense scale of the undertaking, which often required substantial investment from local governments and sometimes private enterprise. Securing the necessary funds was a continuous process, and debates often arose regarding the best methods for financing such large public works. Furthermore, the technical processes of laying vast networks of pipes beneath already built-up areas were fraught with difficulty, often disrupting existing streets and businesses and requiring careful planning to minimize inconvenience. The materials used, while robust, were also heavy and difficult to transport and install, demanding significant physical effort from the workforces. This focus on sanitation and water supply was a direct response to the visible consequences of poor hygiene, such as the outbreaks of diseases like cholera that swept through densely populated areas. These epidemics highlighted the direct link between environmental conditions and public health, prompting a more proactive approach to disease prevention through engineered solutions. The understanding of how waterborne pathogens spread was becoming clearer, driving the demand for cleaner water sources and more effective ways to remove human and industrial waste from the urban environment. This imperative for public health became a powerful motivator for the systematic improvements in city infrastructure. The development of efficient sewage systems was a particularly demanding technical process, involving the design of underground channels that could carry waste away from residential areas without polluting rivers or creating unhealthy conditions within the city. Engineers had to consider gradients for flow, the strength of materials to withstand underground pressure, and the eventual disposal or treatment of the waste. The labor organization for this work often involved navvies, robust laborers accustomed to demanding physical tasks, who dug trenches and laid pipes, a physically taxing but essential part of building these vital arteries for the city. The sheer volume of earth moved and materials installed was staggering. Moreover, the introduction of piped water into homes represented a significant advancement in daily life, transforming domestic routines and improving overall cleanliness. The processes involved ensuring a consistent and reliable supply of water, which meant building reservoirs, pumping stations, and extensive networks of smaller pipes to reach individual dwellings. This transformation changed how people cooked, cleaned, and managed their households, moving away from reliance on wells or public pumps and impacting the daily rhythms of urban existence. The labor organization shifted to maintaining these systems, ensuring continuous operation and repair. Beyond the technical aspects, the implementation of these urban improvements also involved complex administrative processes, as new public health boards and municipal departments were established to oversee planning, construction, and ongoing maintenance. These bodies had to coordinate efforts across different districts, manage budgets, and often contend with local resistance or vested interests. The evolution of these administrative structures reflected a growing recognition of the government's role in ensuring the basic welfare of its citizens, a new layer in the nation's organizational framework. Such systematic adaptations were critical for managing societal change. The materials employed in these endeavors, such as cast iron pipes, bricks, and cement, were often sourced from the burgeoning industries discussed in earlier periods, demonstrating a tangible connection between manufacturing advancements and urban development. The ability to produce these materials in quantity and of suitable quality was fundamental to the success of these large-scale engineering projects. This reliance on industrial output underscored how interconnected the various strands of societal progress had become during this transformative era, with advancements in one area directly fueling development in another. It showed how foundational materials support widespread progress. The systematic approach to engineering the modern city, with its emphasis on sanitation and water supply, fundamentally altered the urban landscape and the health of its inhabitants, setting precedents for urban planning that continue to influence how cities are built and managed today. The scale of these projects and the careful planning required offer a powerful illustration of how collective action, guided by scientific understanding and organized labor, can overcome significant environmental and social challenges, transforming the lived experience for millions. Such adaptations reveal the complexity of historical change. The relentless rhythm of the factory floor was a new kind of music, one that dictated life in a way the old village bells never had. For years, the spinning jenny and the power loom had reshaped how cloth was made, and now the very act of manufacturing itself was undergoing a systematic overhaul. This new era of industry demanded a different kind of organization, a meticulous approach to mass production that transformed raw materials into finished goods at an unprecedented scale. The core processes involved breaking down complex tasks into smaller, repetitive steps, a method that relied on a highly structured labor organization within the factory walls. Consider the sheer efficiency gained by such specialization. Instead of one artisan completing an entire product, a team of workers each performed a single discrete operation, their movements guided by the steady pace of the machinery. This division of labor, a key innovation in factory management, meant that a worker might spend their entire shift simply attaching a specific component or tightening a particular bolt. The materials themselves, whether iron for machinery or cotton for weaving, were fed into this industrial pipeline, transformed through a series of standardized processes. This approach required not only precision from the machines, but also a new level of discipline and coordination from the workforce. The challenges inherent in this new factory system were significant, not least the sheer intensity of the work and the demands placed upon the human body. Unlike the more flexible rhythms of home-based crafts, factory labor was governed by the clock, with supervisors overseeing every minute. The sheer noise generated by the machines could be quite jarring, a harsh mix of grinding gears and clattering metal that filled the working spaces. Workers often found their eyesight strained by the fine detail required for certain tasks, or their hands calloused from repetitive motions. These were the human costs, the physical consequences of a system designed for maximum output. This systematic approach extended to the very management of the factory itself. Foremen and overseers became crucial figures, responsible for ensuring that production quotas were met and that workers adhered to the strict rules of the establishment. Their role involved not just directing labor, but also enforcing punctuality and discipline, often through stern reminders or even fines. The materials used in the factory were carefully tracked, from the initial intake of raw goods to the final output of finished products, all recorded in ledgers to monitor efficiency and profitability. This meticulous record-keeping formed a vital part of the factory's operational processes. Beyond the immediate factory gates, the impact of this new industrial organization was widely felt. The consistent output of manufactured goods meant that more items were available at lower prices, a change that began to reshape how people lived and what they could afford. This greater availability of goods, a direct result of improved mass production techniques, altered consumption patterns across society. However, it also led to a more rigid distinction between the workers who toiled within the factories and those who managed or owned them, creating new social stratifications. One ongoing scholarly debate centers on the extent to which this early factory system truly benefited the working class versus the industrialists. The very concept of time transformed within these industrial settings. The leisurely pace of agricultural life, or even earlier artisan work, gave way to a strictly regimented schedule, dictated by the factory whistle and the ceaseless turning of gears. Workers learned to synchronize their actions to the demands of the machines, a process that required considerable adaptation. The materials, whether delivered by horse-drawn cart or increasingly by rail, arrived according to the factory schedule, fueling the continuous operation. This precise timing was a technical aspect of factory management that had profound implications for daily life. The implementation of time and motion studies, a more formal attempt to optimize production processes, began to emerge. This involved carefully observing workers as they performed their tasks, identifying ways to eliminate wasted movements or streamline operations. The goal was to make each worker as efficient as possible, a systematic effort to maximize output. The materials being processed were often handled with new tools designed for speed and precision, further contributing to the overall efficiency. This focus on optimizing every aspect of the production chain was a hallmark of Victorian industrial ambition. A peculiar detail from this period involves the introduction of standardized work uniforms in some factories. While often practical, these uniforms also served to visually unify the workforce, subtly reinforcing the idea of a collective identity tied to the factory itself, rather than individual craftsmanship. This organizational practice aimed to instill a sense of belonging, or perhaps conformity, among the workers, a social aspect of the factory's labor organization. The materials for these uniforms were typically durable and inexpensive cotton. Furthermore, the process of factory management often involved a hierarchy of supervisors and foremen, each responsible for a specific section of the production floor. This layered structure ensured that instructions flowed down from management to the workers, and that production targets were monitored at every stage. The materials were thus managed not just as resources, but as elements moving through a complex, interconnected system. This organizational framework was designed to maintain order and control over a large, often dispersed workforce. The sheer volume of goods produced meant that warehousing and distribution became increasingly important processes. Factories needed efficient ways to store finished products before they could be shipped to markets, whether domestic or overseas. The materials for packing and shipping, such as crates, barrels, and sturdy sacking, became essential components of the industrial supply chain. This logistical challenge was a direct consequence of the success in scaling up manufacturing processes. It's a curious observation that while the focus was on mechanical efficiency, the human element remained a constant factor, often leading to unexpected outcomes. A team of weavers, for instance, might develop their own informal methods of organizing tasks to make the long hours more bearable, or to share the workload more equitably. These small acts of worker agency, often occurring outside the formal labor organization, highlight the resilience of human adaptation even within highly structured environments. The camaraderie found amongst workers facing similar daily challenges was a significant, if unofficial, aspect of factory life. This systematic drive for efficiency and mass production, while undoubtedly boosting Britain's industrial power, also generated significant societal tensions. The stark contrast between the wealth accumulated by factory owners and the often meager wages and harsh conditions faced by the workers fueled considerable unrest. Strikes and calls for reform became more common, as the organized labor of the factory system also gave rise to organized demands for better treatment and fairer conditions. The materials of discontent, it seemed, were being forged alongside the industrial output. The examination of these industrial processes reveals how the systematic organization of labor and the efficient transformation of materials became foundational to modern manufacturing, creating both immense productivity and new societal dynamics. The ships docked in London's bustling harbors carried more than just wool and manufactured goods. They transported the very lifeblood of Britain's burgeoning global presence. The intricate processes that moved these commodities across vast oceans and into the hands of eager merchants formed the backbone of an era defined by its reach. This trade demanded a sophisticated understanding of shipping routes, weather patterns, and the careful management of perishable materials like grain and livestock, alongside the more robust iron and textiles previously discussed. The labor organization involved a multitude of skilled individuals, from the rough hands of dock workers heaving crates to the meticulous calculations of clerks in counting houses, all synchronized by the tick of the clock and the rhythm of the tides.
Significant challenges faced these global arteries of commerce. Securing fair prices for British goods abroad while simultaneously acquiring raw materials at competitive rates required sharp negotiation and constant vigilance against the shifting tides of international markets. The sheer distances involved meant that communication lagged considerably, with news of market shifts or potential disruptions taking weeks or even months to arrive. This inherent delay meant that fortunes could be made or lost on the strength of informed guesswork and the ability to anticipate future needs. The effectiveness of these networks depended on a complex, almost invisible web of contracts, bills of lading, and letters of credit, all meticulously organized. The development of financial institutions paralleled the expansion of trade, providing the essential mechanisms for investment and exchange. This involved the technical processes of banking, where capital was pooled, loans were issued, and currency conversions were managed with increasing sophistication. The materials of finance were not tangible goods, but paper, banknotes, ledgers, and promissory notes, representing abstract value, yet holding immense power in shaping economic outcomes. The labor organization within this sphere consisted of clerks, accountants, and financiers, their expertise lying in numeracy and an understanding of credit and debt, a different kind of labor entirely from the forge or the factory floor. These financial systems faced their own unique challenges. Ensuring the stability of currency, managing the flow of gold and silver, and mitigating the risks associated with long-distance transactions were constant concerns for those at the helm of British finance. The reliability of trading partners and the political stability of distant lands directly impacted the security of investments. This era saw the formalization of such practices, with the establishment of new banks and the refinement of accounting methods, creating the infrastructure that would support Britain's imperial ambitions and industrial might. Beyond the direct exchange of goods, the financing of infrastructure projects, both at home and abroad, played a crucial role in this global reach. The construction of railways, canals, and the telegraph lines, detailed in previous discussions, often required significant capital that flowed through these newly established financial channels. This meant that the success of industrial endeavors and imperial expansion was intrinsically linked to the health and efficiency of the banking and credit systems. The need for reliable information regarding global markets and trade opportunities led to the proliferation of trade journals and statistical compilations. These publications, created through the careful processes of data gathering and reporting, served as vital materials for merchants and financiers seeking to understand economic trends. The labor organization behind these publications included editors, statisticians, and printers, all contributing to a more informed business community. The sheer volume of trade meant that port cities transformed into bustling hubs of economic activity, a testament to the success of these global processes. The physical space of the docks, warehouses, and counting houses hummed with the energy of commerce, where deals were struck and shipments were organized with remarkable speed. The sheer diversity of materials arriving from all corners of the globe, spices from the East, timber from Canada, cotton from India, painted a vivid picture of Britain's interconnectedness. The organization of labor in these port cities was particularly dynamic, involving a wide range of skills from stevedores handling heavy cargo to customs officials meticulously checking manifests.
This system, while efficient, was also characterized by its inherent risks, with workers facing dangers from falling cargo and treacherous conditions. The continuous flow of goods demanded a constant workforce, adapting to the arrival and departure of ships, a relentless cycle dictated by global demand. The development of maritime insurance also became a critical process in facilitating global trade. By pooling the risks associated with sea voyages, insurers provided a vital safety net for merchants, allowing them to undertake ventures that might otherwise have been too perilous. The materials of this industry were actuarial tables and insurance policies, intricate documents that codified risk and reward. Such financial and logistical advancements were not without their detractors, or those who felt left behind. The concentration of wealth and the power wielded by financiers and large trading companies sometimes created social tensions, a consequence of the systematic organization of global markets. Yet, the sheer scale of these operations allowed for a broader availability of goods, influencing the consumption patterns of many across the nation. The systematic organization of global commerce, from the initial sourcing of raw materials to the final sale of finished goods, truly exemplifies how human ingenuity and organized effort can reshape the very fabric of the world.
The flourishing of new ideas and artistic expression during Victoria's long reign saw a significant transformation in how people accessed and interacted with culture. This was not a sudden upheaval, but a gradual process, akin to the slow ripening of fruit on a vine, where each stage built upon the last. The processes of cultural production became more systematized, moving beyond the patronage of the wealthy to embrace wider markets. The materials involved were no longer exclusively the fine vellum or handcrafted instruments of the past, but included paper, ink, and manufactured musical components, readily available and affordable for a growing public. This shift in materials allowed for a broader dissemination of knowledge and entertainment. The labor organization in the cultural sphere began to diversify, moving beyond the lone genius or artisan. Publishing houses, for instance, employed editors, typesetters, and bookbinders, each playing a specific role in bringing a work to life. Similarly, musical ensembles required conductors, composers, and instrumentalists working together in a structured environment. These organized efforts challenged the solitary nature of artistic creation, introducing new forms of collaboration and sometimes competition as different groups vied for public attention. The technical processes of printing improved dramatically, allowing for the mass production of novels, poetry, and periodicals, making literature accessible to millions for the first time. This accessibility meant that stories and ideas could travel with unprecedented speed and reach. Consider the serial publication of novels, where installments of a story would appear week by week in magazines. This process created a shared experience, with readers eagerly anticipating the next part, discussing plot twists, and forming opinions about characters. The materials of the printing press churned out millions of copies, and the labor organization of authors, editors, and printers ensured these were distributed efficiently, a far cry from the days when a single manuscript was copied by hand. Such a widespread engagement with literature challenged traditional hierarchies of knowledge. Indeed, the Victorian era witnessed the birth of what we might call mass culture. Newspapers, once a privilege of the educated elite, became everyday reading for many. The processes of gathering news, editing it, and printing millions of copies required a sophisticated network. The materials included vast quantities of paper and ink, while the labor organization involved journalists, printers, and delivery boys. This provided a common ground for public discourse, even if the information presented was sometimes biased or sensationalized, a common challenge in the nascent media landscape. It was during this time that a particular brand of sentimental poetry gained immense popularity, with poems often published in affordable collections. A particularly charming anecdote from the period speaks of the poet Alfred Tennyson, a beloved figure whose works were widely read. It is said that upon hearing his poems recited aloud in public houses, he once disguised himself and joined the listeners, moved to see the profound connection his words had with ordinary people. This illustrates the human element behind the processes of cultural diffusion, where art transcended the studio or salon to become part of the fabric of daily life. The materials that facilitated this were the printed pages, and the labor organization that ensured their distribution made such moments possible. The rise of the middle class, a trend discussed previously, played a significant role in shaping cultural consumption. With more disposable income and leisure time, this group became a major audience for plays, concerts, and printed materials. The processes of ticket sales for theaters and the distribution of sheet music for popular songs exemplify this new market dynamic. The materials they purchased were tickets, programs, and the music itself, supporting the labor organization of performers and composers. The challenge for many cultural producers was to cater to both critical acclaim and popular taste. The Victorians also embraced visual culture with enthusiasm. Photography, a relatively new technology, offered a way to capture likenesses and scenes that felt remarkably lifelike. The processes of developing photographs required specialized knowledge and chemicals, while the materials included glass plates or paper negatives and photographic paper. The labor organization involved photographers, their assistants, and later, studios that specialized in portraiture. This innovation challenged traditional painting in its ability to reproduce reality with such speed and fidelity, making portraits accessible to a wider segment of society. The sheer volume of cultural output naturally led to discussions about quality and originality, a recurring challenge throughout history. While many celebrated the democratizing effect of mass production, others lamented the perceived decline in artistic standards. The materials of popular novels, often printed on less durable paper, and the music intended for casual enjoyment were sometimes seen as inferior to earlier forms. Yet the processes of widespread access meant that more individuals had the opportunity to engage with and appreciate different forms of art. The sheer quantity of printed books, for example, allowed for the exploration of diverse subjects, from scientific treatises to thrilling adventure stories. Consider the public libraries that began to emerge, funded by philanthropic efforts or municipal councils. These institutions represented a formalization of the processes of knowledge sharing, providing public access to the materials of learning and literature. The labor organization within these libraries involved librarians who cataloged books and assisted patrons. This was a significant step in making cultural resources available to everyone, regardless of their personal wealth, directly addressing a challenge of limited access. It offered a quiet sanctuary where the sounds of the city outside faded, replaced by the rustle of pages and the soft murmur of readers. This period also saw the popularization of specific genres. Gothic novels, with their tales of mystery and the supernatural, captivated readers. The processes of crafting suspenseful plots and creating atmospheric settings were key. The materials were the ink and paper used to print these often thrilling narratives. And the labor organization of writers and publishers ensured their timely release. The challenge for authors was to continuously invent new scares and twists to keep audiences engaged. This also allowed for the development of specific narrative techniques that were keenly studied and replicated by aspiring writers. A rather unusual aspect of Victorian cultural consumption involved the widespread popularity of illustrated newspapers and magazines that featured intricate woodcut engravings.
These images brought distant lands, scientific discoveries, and current events to life for a public that could not travel or witness them firsthand. The processes of creating these detailed illustrations were painstaking, requiring skilled artists and engravers. The materials were woodblocks, inks, and paper, and the labor organization was highly specialized, involving artists, engravers, and printers. This provided a visual vocabulary for the era, shaping how people perceived the world beyond their immediate surroundings.
The enduring scholarly debate here centers on the extent to which this explosion of cultural production truly fostered independent thought or merely reinforced existing societal norms and expectations. Did wider access to literature and art lead to critical engagement, or did it primarily offer escapism and affirmation of the status quo? The processes of mass production and distribution certainly democratized access, but the materials produced and the labor organization behind them were often driven by commercial interests, a significant challenge in assessing the cultural impact. The very systems designed to share knowledge also had the potential to shape its reception in predictable ways. The Victorians also had a unique approach to the presentation of popular science, often through lectures and public demonstrations. Think of figures like Michael Faraday, who captivated audiences with his experiments in electricity, making complex scientific processes understandable and exciting. The materials used were the scientific apparatus itself, magnets, wires, and batteries, and the labor organization involved assistants and organizers. The challenge was to translate complex scientific principles into accessible language and engaging visual displays, a task Faraday excelled at. It was said that his Christmas lectures for young people were so popular that securing a seat required considerable effort, demonstrating a genuine public appetite for learning. This cultural efflorescence was not without its internal tensions. While many enjoyed the new forms of entertainment, there were also calls for moral improvement and social responsibility in the arts. The processes of censorship and moral guidance were applied to literature and theater, reflecting a societal challenge of balancing creative freedom with perceived public good. The materials that sparked controversy were often books with challenging themes or plays that pushed societal boundaries. And the labor organization of critics and moral guardians sought to shape public opinion. These discussions highlight the continuous negotiation of cultural values. These varied expressions of culture, from serialized novels to public science lectures, demonstrate a society actively engaged with new forms of communication and entertainment. The underlying processes of production, the materials utilized, and the labor organization that brought them to audiences all evolved rapidly, driven by technological advancements and changing social demographics. The challenges of managing this cultural explosion, from ensuring quality to navigating moral debates, shaped the artistic and intellectual landscape of the era in profound ways. The mechanisms of the great steam-powered vessels, those leviathans of the sea, represented a culmination of the engineering spirit that had previously conquered land routes. While railways had shrunk the nation's distances, the ocean liners promised to make the world a neighbor. The internal processes of these ships involved complex boilers, intricate pipework, and precisely machined pistons, all working in concert to generate the power needed for transatlantic journeys. The primary materials were vast quantities of iron and steel, along with specialized alloys for components enduring immense pressure and heat, sourced from the very furnaces discussed before. The labor organization on board mirrored the precision required on land, with engineers and stokers tending the engines, captains and navigators charting courses, and a host of deckhands and stewards managing the vessel and its passengers, all under a rigid hierarchy.
The challenges were immense, from the sheer force of nature at sea, where storms could test the very integrity of the hull and engines, to the logistical complexities of provisioning for weeks at a time and maintaining the complex machinery far from any port. These voyages were not simply about travel. They were about the systematic application of industrial might to the vast, untamed expanse of the oceans, a process that shrank the globe and expanded horizons simultaneously. The transformation of global trade, so profoundly influenced by steam power on land and sea, also necessitated a parallel evolution in financial processes. As goods moved with unprecedented speed, so too did capital. The establishment of robust banking systems and stock exchanges became crucial for facilitating these exchanges, managing investments, and providing the credit needed for the vast industrial and commercial enterprises. The essential materials of this new financial world were not iron or coal, but paper, ink, and the abstract yet powerful concepts of credit and debt, meticulously recorded and governed by evolving legal frameworks. The labor organization within these institutions involved clerks, accountants, brokers, and bankers, all skilled in the management of complex transactions and the assessment of risk, operating within the structured environment of counting houses and exchange floors. The challenges were particularly acute in navigating the volatile nature of international markets, the reliability of distant trading partners, and the constant need to maintain confidence in the financial system itself. This systemic development of global finance, a meticulous framework of interconnected transactions and agreements, was as vital to Britain's burgeoning influence as any steam engine or textile mill.
Furthermore, the societal shifts that accompanied these industrial and commercial revolutions profoundly altered the fabric of daily life for many, influencing cultural processes and the patterns of consumption. As wealth increased, so did access to goods and experiences that were once the preserve of the elite. The materials of this evolving cultural landscape included an explosion of printed matter, books, magazines, and newspapers, along with new forms of entertainment like the music hall and the public park. The labor organization expanded to include writers, artists, printers, actors, and tradespeople, catering to new leisure activities, creating a burgeoning cultural economy. The challenges often revolved around accessibility, with debates arising over the quality of mass-produced culture versus traditional arts, and the ethics of commercialization impacting creative expression. This systematic rise of mass culture, driven by new production methods and a growing, more affluent populace, reshaped not only what people bought, but how they understood themselves and their place in the world, illustrating a dynamic interplay between economic progress and cultural identity. The very character of Britain's dominion extended far beyond its shores, and the processes of colonial administration were a vast and intricate undertaking. Governing territories scattered across continents required a sophisticated system of command and control, managing diverse populations, resources, and economies. The materials essential to this imperial reach included official dispatches, legal codes, maps, military supplies, and the manufactured goods that flowed from British factories to colonial markets, along with the raw materials that returned. The labor organization within the colonial service was layered, comprising administrators appointed from London, military officers maintaining order, surveyors mapping territories, and often a crucial network of local intermediaries who understood the intricate social and political landscapes of the lands being governed. The challenges were formidable. The immense distances involved, the need to adapt governance to vastly different cultures, the constant threat of local unrest, and the ethical complexities inherent in ruling over other peoples. These systematic processes of imperial management, while often fraught with difficulty and moral compromise, were a defining feature of the era, demonstrating how a nation could project its influence and economic reach across the globe through carefully orchestrated administrative structures. The expansion of the nation's infrastructure was not confined to railways and steamships, it extended to the very heart of its cities, requiring new urban planning processes and critical sanitation systems. As populations swelled in towns and cities, the old ways of managing waste and providing clean water proved utterly inadequate, leading to widespread disease. The technical processes developed to address these issues were groundbreaking, involving the design and construction of extensive networks of underground sewers, elaborate water purification plants, and organized refuse collection systems. The materials utilized in these massive public works were extensive, including tons of cast iron for pipes, vast quantities of brick and concrete for construction, and engineered solutions for managing the flow of water and waste. The labor organization needed for such undertakings was considerable, employing skilled civil engineers, surveyors, masons, pipe layers, and thousands of laborers working under challenging conditions to build these unseen arteries of modern urban life. The challenges were not only technical, but also financial and political, requiring significant public investment and overcoming resistance from those who saw such reforms as an unnecessary expense. This systematic approach to urban hygiene and development was a direct response to the pressures of industrialization, fundamentally altering the health and habitability of urban environments, and serving as a crucial lesson in the responsibilities of collective action for public well-being. The very framework of law and justice also underwent significant reform, a complex set of processes designed to cope with a rapidly changing society. As the population grew and new forms of crime emerged, the legal system needed to adapt, becoming more structured and systematic in its operation. The technical processes involved in policing, such as establishing organized constabularies with standardized training and investigative techniques, were a marked departure from earlier methods. Court procedures, record-keeping, and the administration of prisons were also subject to scrutiny and reform, aiming for greater efficiency and fairness, though often grappling with the harsh realities of punishment. The materials of justice were legal statutes, precedent-setting court decisions, and detailed case files, all meticulously organized and managed. The labor organization within the legal system saw the rise of a professionalized police force, judges operating within established judicial hierarchies, barristers and solicitors expertly navigating the legal complexities, and a growing administrative class to manage the vast volume of legal business. The challenges included adapting laws to new industrial practices, addressing the social inequalities that contributed to crime, and debating the merits of punishment versus rehabilitation. These systematic refinements of the legal system, though often slow and contested, reflected a society's ongoing effort to maintain order and administer justice in an era of profound transformation. The era witnessed a substantial growth in the middle class, a significant shift in social processes driven by the opportunities afforded by industrial wealth and professional advancements. This burgeoning group, distinct from the aristocracy and the working classes, found its identity and status through new avenues of economic and social engagement. The materials that became symbolic of middle-class aspiration included well-appointed homes filled with manufactured furniture, access to a growing array of printed books and periodicals, and the acquisition of skills through education. The labor organization within this class typically involved intellectual or managerial pursuits, such as engineering, accounting, medicine, teaching, and the management of commercial enterprises, requiring specialized knowledge rather than manual dexterity. The challenges for this aspiring class often centered on the establishment of respectability, the acquisition of social capital through education, and adherence to strict moral codes, and navigating the subtle distinctions within their own ranks. This systematic evolution of social stratification, creating a substantial new stratum in society with its own aspirations and cultural markers, demonstrated how economic progress could fundamentally reshape the social landscape, leading to new divisions and opportunities.
The intellectual currents of the age were equally dynamic, fueled by systematic processes of scientific and technological innovation. Britain became a crucible for discovery, where curiosity was increasingly channeled into organized research and development, laying the groundwork for future advancements. The technical processes involved in this scientific pipeline were diverse, ranging from meticulous laboratory experiments and the careful observation of natural phenomena to the systematic application for patents and the dissemination of findings through learned societies and specialized journals. The materials used were as varied as the inquiries, from delicate optical instruments and chemical reagents to robust prototypes of new machines and electrical components. The labor organization spanned a spectrum from solitary inventors and dedicated researchers to collaborative teams of scientists and engineers, often supported by skilled mechanics and craftsmen who could bring theoretical designs to tangible reality. The challenges inherent in this pursuit of knowledge included securing funding for often speculative research, the difficulties of translating theoretical breakthroughs into practical applications, and overcoming skepticism from both the public and established institutions. This systematic cultivation of innovation, transforming raw curiosity into measurable progress, was a key driver of the era's dynamism and cemented Britain's reputation as a global leader in scientific and technological advancement. Indeed, the impact of these transformative processes extended even to the very way people understood their place in the world, as cultural production and consumption patterns shifted dramatically. The burgeoning printing industry, coupled with new methods of reproduction in art and music, made cultural experiences more accessible to a wider population than ever before. The materials that defined this evolving cultural landscape included not only books and newspapers, but also sheet music, lithographs, and the very instruments of performance, along with theatrical props and stage designs. The labor organization expanded to encompass authors, composers, painters, engravers, publishers, actors, musicians, and the growing numbers of people who formed the audiences for these diverse cultural offerings, from the concert hall to the public library. The challenges in this sphere often involved navigating the balance between artistic integrity and commercial viability, dealing with censorship, and grappling with changing tastes and societal values reflected in the arts. The systematic growth of cultural industries, responding to and shaping public opinion, demonstrated how a nation's creative output and consumption habits were deeply intertwined with its broader economic and technological progress, forging a new collective identity through shared experiences. As we look back across the vast sweep of the years, from the young Princess Victoria's ascension to her reign as Empress, it becomes clear that the processes set in motion during that era continue to resonate. The reforms in governance, the harnessing of steam, the weaving of new fabrics with mechanized looms, the forging of iron and steel, the laying of iron rails that connected the land, the electric wires that whispered messages across distances, the administration of a vast empire, the organization of labor in factories, the evolution of justice, the rise of new social classes, the relentless engine of innovation, the engineering of cities for health and order, the fine-tuning of mass production, the intricate dance of global trade and finance, and the very fabric of shared culture. All these were not isolated events, but interconnected processes of profound systemic change. The materials they utilized, the labor organization they demanded, and the challenges they overcame collectively forged a world vastly different from the one that preceded it. Modern research continues to uncover new dimensions of these enduring processes of adaptation and innovation. As the final embers of our journey through Queen Victoria's remarkable life glow softly, let the vastness of her reign, from a young princess to the empress of an era, settle into a peaceful quietude.
Imagine the hushed corridors of Kensington Palace, where a young Victoria once dreamed. And then picture the steady, guiding hand she offered Britain as it navigated the profound changes of the Victorian age. Think of the bustling family life that unfolded within its grand estates, a constant thread through the tapestry of empire. Now, as the day's light fades, allow the echoes of these stories to drift away like the gentle chime of a distant clock. Let the immense, yet ultimately human story of Queen Victoria inspire a sense of deep calm within you. May your slumber be as serene as a moonlit stroll through a Victorian garden, undisturbed and profoundly restful. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as comforting as a well-loved volume of history.